Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. The Dancer of the Silent Oasis. The first time I saw the prince, I was dancing for the dust. My world was the packed earth of the courtyard, the hushed whispers of the serving women, and the weight of the silver bells around my ankles. I was Layla, the orphan of the sandstorm, a jewel of the palace with no past and a future that stretched only as far as the next moonrise. I belonged to the Sultan's court, a shimmering accessory to be displayed and then forgotten, like a forgotten melody in a gilded hall. But that night, the night the prince returned from the northern wars, the axis of my world tilted, and the dust began to sing my name. The air in the grand courtyard was thick with the perfume of night-blooming jasmine and roasted saffron. 1,000 lanterns like captive stars cast a trembling, honeyed light over the assembled courtiers. Their silks were a river of emerald, sapphire, and ruby, a rustling symphony of wealth and idleness. I stood in the shadow of the colonnade, my own costume of sheer crimson silk and ancient silver coins feeling suddenly frail. The music began, a low, insistent thrum of the oud that vibrated in the marrow of my bones. I stepped into the circle of light, my bare feet kissing the cool marble. I was not dancing for the Sultan on his ivory throne, nor for his viziers with their calculating eyes. I was dancing for the space between heartbeats, for the stories my body could tell without a single word. And then I saw him. He stood apart, a silhouette of shadow and solemnity against a pillar of moon-white stone. Prince Caravan. His return was the reason for this spectacle, yet he seemed the least interested spectator. His robes were the color of dried blood, simple and unadorned, a stark contrast to the peacocks of the court. But it was his eyes that arrested me. They were the color of a desert storm, gray and fierce and full of distant thunder. They did not skim over me, they pierced. They saw the dance not as a seduction, but as a language. As I spun, my veils floating like clouds at sunset, our gazes locked. The music, the crowd, the very air itself dissolved. In that suspended moment, there was only the silent, screaming conversation between a dancer's soul and a warrior's haunted eyes. A single forbidden chord was struck deep within me, a note so profound and terrifying I almost stumbled. The world rushed back in with the final crash of the drum. I finished my dance breathless, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. As I bowed, my forehead touching the cold floor, I knew nothing would ever be the same. The dust had settled, and it had written his name upon my heart. He was a ghost in his own home. Prince Caravan, the Sultan's only son and heir, was a man carved from a different stone than his father. Where the Sultan was all opulence and loud proclamations, the prince was silence and stillness. Whispers followed him through the palace corridors, whispers of his brilliance in battle, of his strange, solitary ways, and of the tragedy that had befallen his mother, a sorceress of the old blood, who had vanished into the dunes when he was just a boy. It was said he had inherited her sight, her connection to the deep old magic that slept beneath the sand. This, more than anything, made the court wary of him. They loved a warrior, they feared a mystic. I tried to forget the storm in his eyes. I threw myself into the rhythm of my life, the dawn prayers, the hours of practice by the reflecting pool, the quiet evenings with the other dancers. But the palace had become a map of his possible presence. Every turned corner, every shadowed archway, held the potential of him. I found myself listening for the sound of his boot heels on the marble, a sound distinct from the soft slippers of the courtiers. I began to notice the scent he left in his wake. Not perfume, but the clean, sharp aroma of the desert at night, of ozone and sage. Our second meeting was not in a hall of 1,000 eyes, but in the solitude of the Library of Whispers. It was a place few visited, a cavernous room where scrolls slumbered in cedarwood cabinets, and the air smelled of ancient paper and forgotten spells. I went there to steal a moment of peace, to trace the illuminated patterns of celestial charts. I did not hear him enter. I simply felt a change in the pressure of the room, a warmth at my back. I turned, and he was there, so close I could see the flecks of silver in his storm-gray eyes. He did not speak. His gaze fell to the scroll I had been studying, a map of the constellations as they were known 1,000 years ago. He reached out, not towards me, but to the parchment, his fingers, a soldier's fingers, calloused and strong, hovering over a drawing of a twin star. The lovers. His voice was low, a rumble that felt like it came from the earth itself. It is said they can only be seen by those who have known a love that defies the sky. He finally looked at me, and the intensity was almost a physical touch. Do you believe that, dancer? My throat was dry. I, who had commanded attention with the sway of my hips, was rendered speechless by a simple question. I could only shake my head, a barely perceptible movement. I had known no love, only duty. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it did not reach his eyes. Neither did I. He leaned closer, and his whisper was for me alone. A secret passed on the wind. But then I had not seen you dance. He turned and left as silently as he had come, leaving me alone with the thunder of my own heart and the scent of the desert night clinging to the air. The forbidden chord within me swelled into a dangerous, beautiful melody. Days bled into weeks, each one laced with the exquisite torture of his nearness. He began to appear in my world with a frequency that could not be coincidence. He would be walking in the gardens as I passed. He would be observing the training grounds as I practiced new forms under the watchful eye of the dance master. We never exchanged more than a glance, a charged silence that spoke volumes. The emotional tension was a fine-spun web, tightening around us both. I saw the same war in his eyes that raged within me. A battle between duty and desire, between the crown he was born to wear and the wild, unknown magic he seemed to embody. The turning point came on a night when the moon was a sliver of polished bone. Unable to sleep, I slipped from the women's quarters and stole down to the Silent Oasis, a small, hidden garden within the palace walls where a single spring-fed pool lay like a black mirror under the stars. I stood at its edge, looking at my reflection, a pale, fragmented ghost in the water. I did not hear him approach this time either. I felt him. I turned, and he was already there, his form dark and solid against the star-dusted sky. "This is a forbidden place for you," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "Every place feels forbidden now," I answered, the first full sentence I had ever spoken to him. The truth of it hung between us, raw and undeniable. He took a step forward, then another, until he stood beside me at the water's edge. Our shoulders did not touch, but the space between us crackled with an energy I could almost see. "They call you the jewel of the court," he murmured, looking at my reflection in the water. "But jewels are cold, hard things. You are not that. When you dance, it is like watching a soul on fire." I risked a glance at his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the curve of his lips. "And you, my prince? Are you the sword they say you are?" cold and sharp. He turned his head, and his gaze was a physical caress, trailing over my face, my lips, my neck. I have been. But fire can temper a sword. It can make it something else entirely. He raised his hand, and for a heart-stopping moment I thought he would touch me. Instead, he gestured to the pool. Look. I looked down. The still water was no longer black. It had begun to glow with a soft phosphorescent light, tiny pinpricks of blue and green swirling beneath the surface like submerged stars. It was magic. His magic. My mother's legacy, he whispered, his breath a warm caress against my temple. It only answers to true emotion, to something real. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. In a world of artifice and performance, this was the most real thing I had ever witnessed. It was a confession more intimate than any touch. We stood there for an eternity, two souls reflected in a pool of starlight, the silence between us louder than any declaration of love. The desert wind sighed through the palm fronds, carrying the scent of his magic and the promise of a destiny we were now irrevocably stepping into. The web had tightened, and I had no wish to escape its silken strands. The desert holds its breath before the dawn, and in that hushed purple hour, I knew I was lost to him. The Prince of Storms had found his calm in my eyes, and the Dancer of the Dust had found her sky in his magic. We were a secret written in starlight on water, a story too dangerous to tell, yet too beautiful to forget. And as the first ray of sun gilded the horizon, I understood that our love was not a quiet thing. It was a coming tempest, and we were standing directly in its path. The world after the oasis was painted in different colors. The gold of the palace seemed brighter, the scent of spices sharper, the weight of my silver bells a lighter, more joyful music. I carried the memory of the glowing water and the heat of his gaze close to my heart, a secret warmth against the cold propriety of the court. We did not speak of it again. Our encounters returned to stolen glances and charged silences, but the texture of that silence had changed. It was no longer a question but a promise. It hummed with the knowledge of what we had shared, a fragile, luminous truth in a world of shadows. I began to see the magic everywhere. It was not in grand gestures, but in the subtle warp and weft of the world around him. A flower would bloom out of season near his path, its petals the color of a twilight I had only seen in my dreams. The palace cats, usually aloof, would twine around his ankles as if he were their own. Once in the great hall, a goblet of wine was knocked from a table, and I saw his fingers twitch almost imperceptibly. The falling liquid seemed to hang in the air for a breath too long before splashing onto the marble, as if time itself had hesitated at his unspoken command. I was the only one who saw it. I was the keeper of his truth, and the weight of that knowledge was both a terror and a delight. My dancing transformed. Where before it was a performance of technical precision and alluring mystery, now it became a confession. When I danced in the court, my body told the story of starlight on water, of a connection that defied reason. I poured the longing, the fear, the incandescent joy into every movement, my veils painting pictures of a love I could not name aloud. The courtiers murmured that the jewel of the court had acquired a new fire, a deeper passion. They applauded louder, their eyes hungry for the spectacle. But I was not dancing for them. I was dancing for him. And from his place in the shadows, his stormy eyes would watch, and in their depths, I saw the reflection of my own soul burning. Our secret meetings became our lifeblood. We were phantoms in the daylight, prince and dancer, master and servant. But in the deep, quiet heart of the night, We were simply Kaylin and Layla. We met in the Library of Whispers, where he would show me scrolls of lost kingdoms and constellations whose true names were forgotten. He taught me that the stars were not random fires, but a great sprawling story written across the heavens. He traced the line of a constellation called the Dancer's Veil, his finger a hair's breadth from the parchment. They say she dances for her lost love, who was turned into the north wind, he said, his voice low and intimate in the dusty silence. And on certain nights, if you listen very closely, you can hear the wind sighing her name. Layla, I whispered without thinking. The air in the library stilled. His eyes, dark and endless in the lamplight, held mine. Yes, he breathed. Just like that. He began to share the burden of his heritage. His mother, Ilara, was not just a sorceress. She was the last guardian of a line that protected the desert from a creeping, silent decay they called the Qumri, the dust that whispers. It was a blight that drained color, sound, and life, leaving only a gray, sterile silence in its wake. The northern wars had not been mere border skirmishes. They were a fight against the outer tendrils of this blight. His father, the Sultan, saw it as a military problem, an enemy to be crushed with steel and strategy. But Kaylin knew the truth. Steel was useless. Only the old, deep-rooted magic, the kind that slept in the blood and bones of the land, could hold it back. And that magic was dying with him, a lonely prince in a court that feared what it could not understand. I am a lock with no key, he confessed one night in the oasis, the water once again shimmering with our combined emotion. I have the power but not the knowledge. My mother disappeared before she could finish my training. Her grimoires, her spells, they were lost with her. The despair in his voice was a physical ache in my own chest. I reached out then, for the first time, driven by an impulse greater than fear or decorum. My fingers brushed against the back of his hand where it rested on the cool stone edge of the pool. A spark, not of light but of pure feeling, jumped between us. The glowing water flared, brilliant as a fallen galaxy, and for a single dizzying moment, a vision flashed behind my eyes. A vast, hidden cavern beneath the dunes, lit by crystals, shelves carved from living rock holding books bound in strange, soft leather. The scent of papyrus and lightning filled my senses. Then it was gone. I snatched my hand back, gasping. Kaylin stared at me, his expression one of stunned revelation. "What did you see?" he demanded, his voice rough with a desperate hope. I don't know. I stammered, my heart hammering. A place. A hidden place. He gripped my shoulders, his touch not harsh but fervent. Describe it. I did my best, the images already fading like a dream upon waking. The crystals, the living rock, the strange books. As I spoke, the light in his eyes grew from a flicker to a blaze. The Vault of Whispers, he breathed, awestruck. It was my mother's sanctum. The court scholars believe it is a myth. I have searched for it since I was a boy. His hand slid from my shoulders to cup my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbones. The intimacy was so profound it stole my breath. Layla, you are not just the keeper of my truth. You are the key. The revelation changed everything. Our stolen moments were no longer just about stolen touches and whispered dreams. They became a quest. We spent our nights in the library, cross-referencing old maps and poetic texts, searching for clues to the vault's location. The emotional tension between us, once a slow, sensual burn, now became a focused, white-hot flame. Every glance was a strategy, every silent meeting a planning session layered with the unspoken language of our hearts. The danger was immense. If the Sultan discovered his heir was consorting with a dancer on a quest for forbidden magic, my life would be forfeit, and Kaelin's claim to the throne would be shaken. Yet, the greater danger was the Khumri, the creeping silence that threatened to consume everything we loved. The weight of it should have crushed me. Instead, I felt more alive than ever. My dancing became a map of our search. A slow, searching turn represented our frustration. A sudden, sharp series of steps was the thrill of a new clue. A final, graceful collapse was the ache of another dead end. He watched and he understood. We were bound now not just by desire, but by a shared sacred purpose. His magic and my intuition had become two halves of a single weapon. One evening, as I danced for the court, a new rhythm found me. It was a rhythm of digging, of discovery, of something ancient breaking free. I moved with a certainty I did not feel, my body telling a story my mind did not yet know. I spun my veils, creating a vortex of color, and as I came to a stop, my arm outstretched, my finger pointing not at the Sultan, nor at any courtier, but towards the great, arched window that faced the endless dunes. A collective gasp went through the room. It was an unprecedented breach of protocol. In the ringing silence that followed, my eyes found Kaelin's. He was not looking at my pointed finger. He was looking at my face, and in his stormy gaze, I saw not anger, but a dawning, terrifying understanding. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He had received the message my body had delivered. The map was not on parchment. It was in the dance. The trail was no longer cold. The tempest was no longer coming. We were riding its very eye. The heart has its own compass, pointing not to north but to truth. And in the silent language of my turning body, I had charted a course to a secret buried by time. He was the lock and I was the key, and in the desert's shifting sands, our destiny was waiting to be unearthed. The silence in the throne room was a living, suffocating entity. My pointed finger, still extended towards the distant dunes, felt like a betrayal carved from my own bone. The court's shock was a palpable wave, followed by a low, buzzing murmur of outrage. I had broken the most sacred rule. A dancer is decoration, a living sculpture. She does not command attention, she receives it. I lowered my arm, my body trembling not from exertion, but from the terrifying leap I had just taken. My gaze remained locked with Kaelin's. His face was a mask of princely indifference, but his eyes were a wildfire, consuming the distance between us. In their depths, I saw the map I had just drawn with my body, clear and precise as ink on parchment. I was dismissed from the court with a sharp, wordless gesture from the master of ceremonies. The walk back to the women's quarters was the longest of my life. The eyes of the guards and servants felt like physical blows. I was now marked, a disruption in the perfect order of the palace. But beneath the fear, a fierce, defiant joy burned. I had spoken to him in the only language that was truly ours, and he had understood. He came to me that night not in the oasis, but in the one place no one would think to look, the dying vats of the textile workshop. The air was thick with the pungent scent of indigo and mulberry. The only sounds the drip of water and the distant cry of a desert fox. He emerged from the shadows between great bolts of hanging silk, his form materializing like a phantom from my most desperate dreams. "The scorpion's tail," he said without preamble, his voice hushed and urgent. "A rock formation a half-day's ride to the east. Your final spin, the way your veil coiled and then struck towards the window, that was it." He was close enough now that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the frantic pulse at the base of his throat. "How did you know?" "I didn't," I confessed, my own voice a whisper. "It was the music. It was a feeling. As if my bones were remembering a path my mind has never walked." He did not question it. He simply accepted this truth of me, as I accepted the truth of his magic. This faith was the bedrock of our forbidden alliance. He told me his plan. He was to lead a small sanctioned hunting party at dawn, a cover for his true mission. He would go to the scorpion's tail, but he would not go alone. "I cannot stay behind," I said, the words leaving no room for argument. It was not a request. The vision of the vault had come to us. The path had been shown to me. We were two halves of a single purpose now. The danger was astronomical. For a prince to take a dancer from the harem on a private expedition was a scandal that could see me banished or worse. For me to be found alone with him in the desert, the consequences did not bear thinking of. Yet, the greater consequence of inaction, of allowing the Qamari to spread its gray silence, made our personal peril seem trivial. Dawn found me disguised in the loose, practical robes of a young stable hand, my face shadowed by a deep hood. The coarse fabric scratched my skin, a stark contrast to the silks I was accustomed to. I kept my head down as I helped a trusted, silent groom prepare the horses. Kalen arrived with two of his most loyal guards, men who had fought with him in the north and whose loyalty was to him, not his title. Their eyes swept over me without recognition, without interest. I was part of the scenery. The moment we rode out of the palace gates, the world changed. The air, once heavy with perfume and politics, became clean and vast. The sun rose, painting the dunes in waves of ochre and rose gold. The only sounds were the sigh of the wind, the crunch of hooves on sand, and the beat of my own heart, a wild, hopeful drum against my ribs. Kalen rode slightly ahead, a commanding figure astride his black stallion. He rarely looked back at me, but I felt his awareness of me as a constant, steady presence, a tether in the immense emptiness. We reached the scorpion's tail as the sun reached its zenith. It was a stark, brutal landscape of jagged black rock that clawed at the hard blue sky. It felt ancient and utterly lifeless. My hope, so vibrant during the ride, began to wither. This was a place of death, not of hidden knowledge. But Kalen dismounted and began to walk with a surety that belied the barrenness. He placed his hand flat against a sun-baked rock face, his eyes closed. I watched as he breathed deeply, his brow furrowed in concentration. The air around him shimmered not with heat but with power. A low, grinding rumble echoed through the canyon, a sound so deep it was felt more than heard. Before us, a seam appeared in the rock, a crack that widened into a dark, narrow passageway. The scent that wafted out was the same from my vision: ancient papyrus, cold stone, and the sharp, clean smell of a lightning strike. The Vault of Whispers. The interior took my breath away. It was not a tomb but a temple to knowledge. The ceiling was a tapestry of glowing crystals, casting a soft, ethereal light. Shelves were not built but grown from the living rock, and upon them rested scrolls and books bound in leather that seemed to shift color in the faint light. In the center of the cavern stood a pedestal, and upon it rested a single, open tome, its pages appearing to be made of woven moonlight. Kalen walked towards it as a man in a trance. He stood before the book, his hands hovering over the pages. "My mother's grimoire," he whispered, reverence and grief warring in his voice. He began to read, the words an alien musical language that resonated in the very core of my being. As he read, the crystals above brightened, and faint, ghostly images flickered in the air around him. Symbols of protection, maps of ley lines, diagrams of a balance between life and the consuming silence. I wandered the periphery, my fingers trailing over the spines of other books. I could not read the languages, but I could feel the stories they held. The joy, the sorrow, the immense power. This was his birthright. This was the weapon we needed. It was then that I found it. Tucked away in a niche as if waiting was a small, simple chest of sandalwood. There was no lock. I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a dancer's belt, but unlike any I had ever seen. It was crafted of interwoven silver and platinum, set not with coins, but with tiny flawless diamonds that caught the crystal light and fractured it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was cool to the touch, yet it hummed with a familiar energy. My energy. It was hers, Kalen said from behind me. His reading interrupted. He was looking at the belt with a strange, soft expression. She was a dancer before she was a sorceress. She always said the two arts were the same. A channeling of energy, a telling of truth without words. He lifted the belt from the chest. She would have wanted you to have it. He knelt before me, his head bowed. The gesture was one of such profound devotion that tears filled my eyes. Gently, he untied the simple cord of my disguise and fastened the diamond belt around my waist. The moment the clasp clicked shut, a jolt of pure, clean power surged through me. The crystals in the vault blazed with incandescent light, and for a moment I could feel the entire desert, the shifting sands, the sleeping creatures, the very heartbeat of the land, thrumming in harmony with my own. I was no longer just Layla the dancer. I was Layla the key, and I was now irrevocably armed. He knelt not to a prince, but to the truth we had unearthed. And as the diamonds settled against my skin, I felt the desert itself sigh in recognition. The lock had turned. The dance was no longer a plea, but a declaration of war. The return to the palace was a journey into a different kind of silence. The diamond belt was a secret weight against my skin, a cool, constant reminder of the power we had awakened in the heart of the desert. The world outside the vault of whispers seemed louder, cruder. The gilded opulence of the palace felt like a gaudy mask over a face I had now seen stripped bare. I moved through the familiar corridors as a ghost, my soul still echoing with the hum of ancient crystals and the feel of Kalen's hands at my waist. He was changed. The haunted shadow in his eyes had been replaced by a fierce, focused light. The grimoire was hidden in a compartment known only to him, its secrets now slowly unfurling in his mind. Our meetings became even more perilous, the stakes immeasurably higher. We were no longer just star-crossed lovers. We were co-conspirators in a silent war. The Khumri was no longer an abstract threat from his stories. In the grimoire, it had a name, a nature, a history of consumption. It was a hunger that had devoured other worlds, and our desert was its next intended feast. The first test came subtly. A courtyard garden, renowned for its vibrant, singing songbirds, fell quiet. The flowers did not wilt, but their colors faded, as if viewed through a fine gray veil. The court physicians blamed a strange miasma, a trick of the wind. But Kalen and I knew. We stood at the edge of that garden at twilight, and I felt it, a chilling absence, a suction of joy and life that made the diamonds at my waist feel faintly warm, a silent alarm. "It's here," I whispered, the words tasting of ash. He nodded, his jaw tight. "It tests the edges of our defenses. My father's walls cannot stop what eats at the soul. That night, in the absolute blackness of my chamber, I did not sleep. I stood in the center of the room and I danced. It was not a dance for any eyes but my own and the darkness. I moved to the memory of the vault's energy, to the rhythm of the desert's heartbeat I had felt. I focused on the garden, on the faded petals and the silent birds. I poured the memory of color, the echo of song into my movements. The diamond belt seemed to amplify the intention, weaving my silent prayer into the very fabric of the air. I did not know if it would work. I was acting on an instinct deeper than knowledge. The next morning, a servant girl's delighted cry echoed through the corridor. The birds were singing again. The colors of the flowers were restored, more brilliant than before. It was declared a miracle. I said nothing. But when I passed Kalen in the hall, the look he gave me was one of awestruck reverence. My dance was a weapon. My love was a shield. The tension in the palace tightened like a drumskin. The Sultan, sensing a shift he could not comprehend, became more paranoid, more rigid. He announced a grand celestial banquet, a display of his power and wealth to reassure the court and the gods themselves of his dominion. It was to be the most lavish event in a generation, and I was commanded to dance the central piece, the unveiling of the moon. It was the opportunity we had been waiting for. The banquet would gather the entire court, their energy concentrated, their attention fixed. Kalen believed the collective focus could be a conduit, that a public ritual disguised as a performance could weave a protective web over the entire palace, a barrier of light and memory strong enough to repel the Khumri's gray advance. It was a desperate, dangerous plan. Failure meant exposure and death. Success would be a secret victory only we would understand. The night of the banquet arrived. The grand courtyard was transformed into a mirror of the heavens itself. Lanterns were fashioned into constellations. Silken canopies dyed the color of the twilight sky. The air was thick with the scent of ambergris and hope. The Sultan sat on his throne, a mountain of jewels and pride, with Kalen standing stern and silent at his right hand. I saw the weight on Kalen's shoulders, the burden of the knowledge he carried alone before his unseeing father. Then the music began. A single pure note from a reed flute, hanging in the air like a dewdrop. I stepped into the constellation of lights. I was not Layla. I was the vessel. The diamond belt was a river of cold fire around my hips. My dance began as the old tale dictated, a slow veiled search for the hidden moon. But as I moved, I wove Kalen's magic into the story. My veils did not conceal, they painted. With each sweep of silk, I painted the story of the desert's birth, of the first sunrise, of the laughter of children and the steadfastness of love. I danced the memory of the silent oasis, of the glowing water that had first bound our souls. I could feel Kalen's power flowing into me, not as a command, but as an offering, a stream of starlight meeting the river of my dance. The court watched mesmerized. They saw a performance of unparalleled beauty, but we were building a fortress. It was then that the Khumri struck, not at the edges but at the heart. A wave of palpable cold swept through the courtyard, though the air did not move. The brilliant colors of the silks and lanterns began to leach away, fading to gray. A profound silence fell, swallowing the music. The flute's note was strangled in midair. Panic began to bloom on the faces of the courtiers, a terror that was itself a fuel for the consuming silence. The Sultan rose to his feet, his face a mask of confusion and fury. But Kalen's eyes were on me. In the center of the dying world, I did not stop dancing. As the grayness crept towards me, I reached for the deepest truth I knew. I let the memory of his touch flood me, the sound of his voice, the storm in his eyes. I poured every ounce of my love for him, for the desert, for life itself into my final desperate movements. I was not fighting the silence with sound, but with soul. The diamond belt blazed with a light that defied the gray, a brilliant, defiant white. I spun, a final, furious vortex of color and light against the encroaching nothingness, and as I fell to my knees, my arms outstretched to the fake heavens, I did not look at the Sultan. I looked at Kalan, and I whispered so softly only the magic could hear. For you. From his place beside the throne, Kalan raised his hands. The words from the grimoire, the words of his mother, fell from his lips not as a shout, but as a resonant command that seemed to come from the earth itself. A wave of pure, golden light erupted from him, meeting the brilliant white of my final pose. It washed over the courtyard, a warm, gentle tsunami. The gray receded like a nightmare at dawn. Color flooded back, more vibrant than ever. The music swelled, the silenced note finding its resolution. The court, released from the terror they could not understand, erupted into thunderous, relieved applause. They believed it was all part of the spectacle. The Sultan slowly sank back onto his throne, his eyes wide with a dawning, bewildered fear. He had seen his son's power. He had seen my role in it. The old world, built on his unquestioned authority, had just cracked. In the roaring applause amidst the restored splendor, Kalan's gaze found mine across the sea of faces. The storm in his eyes had quieted into a deep, endless calm. We had won. We had turned the tide. But we had also unveiled ourselves. The hidden war was now a silent, knowing battle between father and son, between the old power and the new. Our love had saved the kingdom, but it had also lit the fuse on a different kind of conflict. As the courtiers surged forward to celebrate the dancer who had delivered such a thrilling performance, I rose to my feet. The diamond belt was cool against my skin once more. Its job done. I was Layla, the orphan, the dancer, the key, and I was no longer afraid. They heard only the music, saw only the dance. They never knew that in the space between the notes, we had fought a war for their souls. And as the applause faded into the star-dusted night, the only sound that remained was the quiet, triumphant beating of two hearts, finally in rhythm with the eternal desert. If the whispers of the desert have found a home in your heart, if the dance of Layla and Kalan has left its echo in your soul, then your journey with us does not have to end here. This channel is a caravan of stories, each one a new oasis waiting to be discovered. By subscribing, you light a lantern that guides us to bring you more tales of forbidden love, ancient magic, and destinies written in the stars. Let the sands of the algorithm know this story moved you. Your likes and comments are more than just clicks. They are the spells that help other wanderers find their way to our fire. Tell us what you felt. Which moment captivated you? Whose secret did you yearn to know? So until the next tale unfolds under 1001 nights, may your dreams be filled with starlight on silent water. Subscribe, and let the next story begin.